teams tend to start with much broader segmentation, right? Maybe it's just personas, and then maybe they hit some sort of life cycle stage. And then over the years or months or days, they get just more sophisticated, right? They start to introduce behavioral segmentation. They maybe, set up some nurture streams. They might build out some life cycle based communication, and then eventually at some point you reach this point where manual personalization just kind of like stops scaling, like it's just kind of impossible to maintain. So there's like too many assets, there's too many next steps, there's too many content combos. And then that's where predictive content comes in, because that can really help us like scale when the manual rules are just impractical. So really what Marketo is doing on the back end of this is observing these patterns of engagement across like a content library. So it's grabbing all of that information and then using those patterns and dynamically selects which asset someone sees, which is super cool in and of itself. But the nuance is that predictive content is designed to reduce content friction, but it's not meant to replace strategy. So it helps more so someone, it helps determine what asset someone sees, but it doesn't tell us like what stage they're in or who they are. And that is a common distinction that has came up, especially in the work that I've done around this. So I like to tell people like predictive content shouldn't be responsible for like determining the life cycle stage, triggering MQLs, qualifying leads, driving revenue decisions, nothing like that. It's really just helping us answer a smaller question that's like, if someone was in this moment and engaging with something online, which content is most likely to resonate? And that's a really valuable question, right? And as the framework kind of explains, and as I'll go through, is predictive content should always be treated as an optimization layer, not so much a foundation. Like some work definitely has to go in prior to. So if a life cycle structure, segmentation, or if content architecture, like if those are all weak, predictive content doesn't fix those problems. It really just amplifies them. Um, so if we sort of like demystify what the system really does, like under the hood or like behind the scenes. So, because predictive content it sounds sophisticated, but the mechanics are like pretty straightforward actually from my experience. So Marketo is doing like four things. It's observing these asset level engagement patterns. So like every time someone clicks, they interact with a piece of content, that activity is recorded. Then second, it compares a lead's engagement behavior to statistical peer groups, right? So in other words, it's like people that have behaved like this person tend to engage with these types of assets, right? Like Victoria is more apt to download XYZ piece of content. So if another Victoria like person lands on our website, let's show them X. Third, it dynamically selects from a pool of approved assets you've given it. So there is some governance around there that's really important. And then the fourth thing is it optimizes towards engagement probability. So it's not pipeline, it's not revenue, it's not engagement, it's engagement probability. And that is a super important rule to just, or a distinction to understand, that it's very probabilistic. It's not deterministic. It can't be right because it doesn't actually know who Victoria is or know who Katie is or Nicole or any of these people on this call. It is just guessing based on patterns that there's a higher likelihood that this person will engage with a particular asset. What's important too is that Marketo doesn't know a handful of things. So it doesn't actually know like buying authority. It doesn't know deal urgency. It doesn't know account context. It doesn't know purchase intent or casual research or the distinction between those two. So that's why I caution people that it should never be used or be responsible for like qualifying decisions, but more so, because of engagement doesn't always necessarily equal high quality. And that's kind of, what we talk about in foundation, especially, with these predictive content projects that Tributa takes on. Um, When we talk about the architecture that really has to be there before turning on something like predictive content or using it in the right way, it's like before predictive content like enters your convo, it's more so it's really important to understand the foundation for your content. So it's only really going to work, or it's going to work best when you're selecting between assets that are interchangeable in intent, right? So they answer the same question, they serve the same buyer moment, they belong to the same funnel stage. If you were to like mix any of this content radically, right? Like you do a beginner's educational article, a deep product comparison, a demo call to action. The system has like no context to understand like which one's appropriate. So one of the best practices that we teach, it's typically having a finite content pool. And maybe you have more than one pool, but those pools have somewhere between those, like, maybe like a handful to a dozen assets. And you can have more than one pool per sort of like life cycle stage, let's say, but they need to share the same characteristics, right? So if we're saying a dozen, they all need to be same funnel stage or the same intent band or same risk tolerance. But if we can't really explain why an asset is in the pool, it probably doesn't belong there. So part of this is that predictive content has to also live within lifecycle governance. And so lifecycle is actually a whole nother passion project of mine and another webinar that I'm doing in April, I think. But predictive content should never like move someone between lifecycle stages. It should never trigger scoring thresholds. It should never like override any qualification logic. Instead, it is existing within an already like well-defined moment, right? So like a mid-funnel nurture, this is where multiple pieces of content are like all really valid next steps, especially if you're in it. So predictive content there would choose what someone sees, not who they are. We're going to talk about data hygiene, and I want to make sure. Perfect. So we're actually here. My apologies for skipping a slide, but there's a lot around, and you can still see this, right, Victoria? Awesome. So there is a lot of data that goes in as a prerequisite to predictive content. So these systems are like super sensitive to like noisy data. So if your history is like full of like bot traffic or internal testing, inconsistent URLs, duplicate content assets, all of that good stuff, or just like really duplicate anything across your system, it's going to learn from those patterns. And so I always tell my clients like garbage in is just going to like produce the garbage out. So we need to be really confident that we, get rid and clean up, because the algorithm um optimizes around bad signals as well. So we have to make sure that we teach it the right way. So if you think about like a mid funnel nurture program, like, example number one, you have known leads, their stage, there are several valid, next step asset pieces. And this is where predictive content selection can increase engagement without like, you're not over segmenting. Second would be like, content heavy industries. So like you think like education or healthcare or SaaS. These environments are like, riddled with like dozens of valid but educational assets. And that's where predictive content could surface really relevant pieces. The third one would be like re-engagement programs. So some of those audiences go a little bit dormant at times, and they would probably respond better to like dynamic content because the system is testing against these same engagement histories. Same with like modular content blocks, like recommended for you or related resources, like those are all highly personalized. And those secondary CTAs, right? Like that we want someone to act, but it's not the primary conversation, and it's not the primary conversion driver. These are great places for predictive content. And alternatively, there's places that can cause some problems in a few situations. Top of funnel acquisition is definitely a common one because the system has very little behavior history to work with. So, a risky, sort of scenario could be like a sales alert program. So, predictive content can't distinguish between research curiosity from purchase readiness. And I know I mentioned that earlier, but one of the biggest mistakes is like using predictive content inside those account based programs because it operates at an individual level, not at a buying group, right? You don't know where you're at on the stage. So it lacks a lot of that account context, which means theoretically you could surface some of those wrong signals. And we don't want to do that. It kind of leads us into like then how, right? Knowing what it does, what it doesn't do, how it does work, how it works really well, what it shouldn't maybe do is like if you're going to implement something like predictive content, there's like four basic steps. And this is far oversimplified, but to kind of get to the root of how you would do something like this, first you have to define that buyer moment. So like what stage is someone in? What question is that buyer trying to answer? And then you start to curate your asset pool of those like, handful to a dozen assets per pool with the same intent, the same stage. And then you begin to start surfacing or like constraining that area to where predictive content can be shown. So, one predictive module per experience, not 100, right? Like we're never doing the primary CTA. We're always surrounded by content that can be deterministic. And then fourth, you really want to produce or like instrument some sort of measurement correctly, which really leads us into how you can measure predictive content in a way that is valuable. Good success, metrics look like reduced content fatigue, increased asset consumption, longer nurture velocity, all of that, like longer engagement within a nurture stream, I mean. Um, and then where some clients I've noticed measure incorrectly are like AI driven pipeline, MQL lifts, and the claims on such, or single touch attribution. Predictive content improves the experience quality, but it's definitely not like revenue causality. We can't claim that with this. You know what I mean? Because it's just too um it's not it's not data driven in that sort of nature. Um, it can be, I think I would, hit home that predictive content can be extremely powerful, so long as it works within this well-designed system. Um, I'm working with a team right now that just kind of turned it on, and that is no judgment on them whatsoever. But when teams like skip over the strategy and they jump straight into the AI, they're not necessarily becoming any smarter with this. They're just getting like louder with the content that they're showing. And so, what I've noticed is that the teams that really get the most value from this are the ones that have a really strong lifecycle architecture, a really clear, content map laid out, really clean engagement data, defined buyer moments. So, in that environment, this predictive content feature becomes more like a tool. Um, it's not a spotlight on what's working or what isn't working. It just becomes this secondary tool that is really additive in nature and can be really precise when used, the right way. And so, with that, I would love to, answer any questions that any of you might have. There are some really following this. I'd be happy to, yeah, Eric. I'll be happy to send this off, and we're actually going to do a little predictive content like readiness assessment too. So we'll send that off to the group. Victoria will get that over to you guys. But yeah, happy to answer any questions. So Eric, go for it. I think you can unmute yourself. So
Yep.
let me know if you can't.
Hopefully you can hear me. So we've
Yeah.
never used it. I work for a nonprofit. We basically send mostly really non-dynamic emails.
Yeah.
And It seems to me, based from what I'm I've heard about this tool. The heaviest lift in terms of getting started is tagging everything. And then after that's done, it's technically pretty easy just to create modules that will personalize based on the tagging. And I guess that really you're going to create modules that are contain the predictive content. And maybe you could kind of like walk through how that works when you create a module that has predictive content. Because in our case, it would probably be like a banner ad for some of our products, and it would vary. The product would vary based upon the end users, what one predicts that they would click on, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, maybe walk through the best way to start tagging, start that
Yeah.
process. Yeah,
Yeah.
would be great to know.
Absolutely.
You're just starting from
Um,
scratch here.
Totally. And I think that that is a really good observation too, because I kind of forgot that like a couple of the clients that I've been working with already have this set up. So I kind of got to kind of jump over the tagging part, but then once we dove into their content pools, we had to like go in and rework. So I think you're right that that is one of the biggest lifts is just always going to be that like upfront like the content organization. So Marketo, like you understand, like you've gathered really needs to understand how the assets relate to each other. So let's talk, let's say ads are our example here. That would mean usually tagging and structuring them by like funnel stage. So like, is this a paid ad for um, something the first time that you're ever promoting your fundraising efforts, or you're doing maybe a fundraising workshop, or is this retargeting? Those would be wildly different stages, specifically for your paid ads. You could also do it by theme, so ads versus infographics or white papers. You could also do it by use case. And so really once the foundation exists there, and you kind of get to decide that, like, of this curated pool of assets, the operational side is really just turning those modules on. And so that's like the most straightforward. It's more so aligning with your team and thinking through like the governance and how you want to organize it on the back end that will make sense to anybody, because so much of these modules will end up becoming interchangeable. That as long as you just keep your focus on like serving the same buyer moment, I think that that's a really good lens to sort of have on while you're tagging this stuff. You could also think about it like tag them through. You could do like buyer moment, you could do funnel stage, you could do content theme, or maybe topic. Um,
Mhm.
how else could you do? Like I would ask yourself like what question is this asset answering, and that may get
Mhm.
us to topics or themes that we could use for tagging. So you might tag something as mid funnel product education maybe, or like you could have a tag that's like how this solution works, right? If you have,
Mhm.
let's say, a set of freebies on your website because you help, other nonprofits learn how to fundraise. I don't know. I'm not in nonprofits, but you know what
Well,
I mean? So I wouldn't
we
say like, yeah,
we also tag our URLs that we have been.
okay,
Isn't that true? I mean, don't we tag our basically our history
yeah,
of what everyone's clicked on in the
right,
past year?
exactly.
And so we're going to go in and tag every URL
Yep.
with whatever. So I guess figuring out what those tags should be. In our case, it might be, it's probably going to be topic in the sense that we work for the semiconductor industry. We work
Okay.
with the largest trade organization of the semiconductor industry. So it'd be like, what part of the semiconductor industry does this link apply to, whether it's
Oh, sure.
fab engineering or marketing or whatever,
Yeah.
so that because my understanding is the Marketo system will look back historically and look at what tags this person has clicked on in history,
Exactly.
and then give them content that aligns with what they've been engaging with. Um, but um, but it sounds like, yeah, it sounds like that's heavy lift because we've had a lot of URLs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially the topics too, because you think about like I may be interested in a topic, but if I'm at a like wildly different stage along this like buyer journey than you are, perhaps
Yeah.
that needs to be like a twofold tag, right? Because we both need to
Hmm.
be presented. We just need the algorithm to be able to like safely choose between everything we're presenting it, right? So like, is it the same intent? Is it the same stage? But it certainly well could be the same educational piece, but I just need to be
Hmm.
tagged differently because I'm interacting with it because I need to recall a piece of information to then, I don't know, get in contact with you. Whereas you might be, digesting the same piece of information or the same piece of content because you haven't worked with your company yet. So
Hmm.
it definitely becomes an organizational project much beyond, okay, now let's use this really cool tool. Like
Yeah. You
we
have to get
almost need like a
got to get product marketing involved. All the team members.
totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Do you already
And
have predictive content turned on?
yeah, it's turned on. We just never used it.
Ever?
We haven't tagged anything. So, just talking to you, I realized
Wild.
that we're going to have to spend hours tagging stuff.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be a massive effort. I mean, it won't be that massive, but it'll be massive enough. Yeah, because you can tag up to the like URL string. You can everything under a certain. You can tag essentially a gazillion URLs at once because everything that's under. Um, I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And you could maybe you could speed it up a little bit. You could
Yeah.
probably you could probably start grouping your assets if they're not already. You could
Yeah.
group them at the program level. You could group
Hmm.
them at a folder level, and then
Hmm.
you can tag them in bulk based on the campaign or the nurture stream they're already in.
Which
So,
and you can tag if the URL contains a word,
yeah,
um, or contains a phrase, um, and um,
you could
but
also update them as well.
yeah, and
If
but you have to,
you
but the hard part is I think having the intelligence, the marketing intelligence to know which phrase to tag, you know,
Sure. Yeah,
and that's
no,
where
there's definitely
yeah,
the strategy behind it. The technical part, I'm
yeah,
like, export your list, update them all, put a column for the tag, you know what I mean? But I'm
yeah,
sure that there could be some actual like at least the speed of the tactical execution. I'm sure that you could like, utilize maybe some sort of AI to be like, here's a spreadsheet, here are the 15 tags we came up with, like tell me what you think applies. And
mhm,
then when you re-upload, um they're just updating, and then that's they're tagging everything up front with that update. But you could, I guess, too, just strategically, I would maybe start with topic or stage because those are pretty
yeah,
broad. Like, if we got like the five stages, we could be like, okay, all the content fits under here. And now within those five stages, what are all the topics? Like, I
mhm,
don't know if that's a good lens, but I almost wonder if that's sort of how I would approach that. Like,
yeah.
stage level or topic, but instead of going through asset by asset and wondering like how would someone interact with it, I don't know if this is helpful, but I'm just like off the cuff thinking about how I would maybe approach that.
Well, I think we'll ask our sort of effectively product managers if they
Uh,
could look at the history of what people clicked on. What are the
yep,
four or five categories, topics, or stages that they would want
yep,
us to capture and then go from
yeah,
there. Then predictive.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really, I mean, we like predictive audiences is like is a whole nother thing, right? Like that would have to
Mhm.
be like its own session. Like that's a whole nother piece of this puzzle that is just wild in nature. That I always thought that it was just creating these people for some reason. Like before I ever like dove in with a client, it was like, oh, it's just like coming up with this. Like it's just coming up with people. And I was like, that's not what it's doing. Like it's just
Yeah,
comparing to this broad audience online, and it's wild, like, especially, like, without getting into specifics about this client I'm working with, like, just the capabilities of giving someone the right piece of content at the right time. Like, could you imagine how much more valuable, like, an email blast becomes when someone actually wants to click on that call to action? Like, it just blew
yeah,
my mind. And I'm like, I love this. I told my boss, I'm like, give me more of these clients. This is the funnest thing I've ever done.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
then we also have region. We have a
Oh,
member versus
sure.
non-member event region, but
Yep.
probably for us, it's like specialization. Um,
Totally.
Thank you for letting me just talk off the top of my head here.
Oh my
It's
God.
good.
Yeah.
I
I
take
love
notes.
it. Yeah. I'm so happy.
But yeah, it sounds like you can really customize the tags.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. I mean, as highly customized as you want, as long as whatever is highly customized with whatever that tag is, within a very selective pool, then it will, it'll work the right way. That's the thing is predictive content is going to work, period. It's just, if you really want it to work the right way, that's there's some best practices type of thing. I mean, think of how many people have Marketo Engage instance that they probably aren't using the right way.
yeah.
And it still works. It still sends emails.
Yeah. We're at the top of the list.
Yeah, totally. You're like, help me. Well, hopefully this resource we're going to share with you can probably give you some really good insight as well too. And we're
Sure.
going to send a little checklist afterwards. And I'd be happy to, Eric, if you want to be added into. Here, I'm going to escape from this screen share. Would you like me to add you into our Marketo office hours? Is